Menopause does not have to be this hard. Most of us are surprised at the symptoms, how many things seem to be going wrong. We gain weight, we really didn't think that was going to happen. We have sleep problems, energy problems, hot flashes, aches and pains. It really can feel like we're aging way too fast. And in many ways, that is what's happening. And everything we knew about how to solve symptoms and how to reduce our weight seems to stop working at this point. But we keep getting the same advice: eat less, exercise more, just try harder. Or we get this new advice: maybe just accept it, you're not 25 anymore. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? Here's what most women don't know. The way we're eating is making our menopause symptoms worse, a lot. And it means how we eat matters more right now than it ever has before. That confusion of, I don't know what's happening to my body and I don't know why nothing's working. I lived there for years. And then I found out what was actually happening. What I didn't know then, and what most women don't realize, is that estrogen and progesterone were doing a tremendous amount of protective work in our bodies. Those hormones were quietly maintaining entire metabolic systems: our blood sugar regulation, our fat metabolism, our brain functions, our muscles, our bones, etc. When those hormones drop, that protection goes with them. So all those systems shift simultaneously. And those symptoms we experience, that's what those systemic changes feel like in our lives. But it doesn't mean we just have to accept that this is our life now, because diet is a powerful lever on all those metabolic systems. And it means changing how we eat in specific ways doesn't just help with the symptoms. It can strengthen all the underlying systems that relate to those symptoms. So I'm going to walk you through 4 of those mechanisms now, because once you can start to really see what's happening in your body, you'll understand why certain nutritional changes, I'm going to share more about those toward the end, can make such a dramatic difference. So let's start with blood sugar. I remember it felt like my body had been hijacked. I had these out of control cravings. I had brain fog that made me feel dumb. That was not a comfortable feeling. And I kept having to apologize to people for how irritable I was being. It's like everything changed about how I showed up in the world. And I didn't realize there was a specific mechanism that was causing all this. So when our estrogen decreases, our cells become much less sensitive to insulin. That affects so many things. So now we have bread or pasta or pastries or anything with sugar, glass of wine, and our blood glucose spikes a lot higher than it used to. And then our body tries to compensate, it pumps out insulin, and then our glucose drops dramatically. And then our body interprets that as a threat, so it floods us with cortisol and adrenaline. So we start to get anxious and irritable and just feel off our game. We get brain fog and we get cravings. And we think, this is menopause? Actually, a lot of this is blood sugar instability. Our bodies just can't manage it like they used to. And the cruelest part is, the foods we reach for to cope, they're the exact foods that make that vicious cycle worse. And that vicious cycle with blood sugar instability is also driving the weight gain. Most of us know women tend to gain weight in menopause, but we're determined it's not going to happen to us. And then it's frustrating to discover that sheer determination doesn't work that way. Here's what happens. Menopause changes where the fat gets stored and what kind of fat we're storing. Before menopause, fat tends to settle around the hips and the thighs. It's mostly just storage. But once we're in menopause, our bodies shift to storing fat around our internal organs instead. That's visceral fat. And visceral fat isn't passive storage. It's metabolically active. It sends out signals that drive inflammation. It makes it harder to sleep and harder to exercise. It tells the body to store even more fat. So visceral fat drives more visceral fat. It's another vicious cycle. And then our pretty healthy version of the Western diet actively feeds that cycle. Inflammation, also one of the most damaging things happening in our bodies in menopause, and one of the least understood. Inflammation became a big problem for me in menopause. I had pain and inflammation conditions in my feet and in my back. And by menopause, that got so much worse that I really was walking like an old woman. I was taking more and more medications to manage pain and inflammation. Now, most of us didn't know this at the time, but estrogen used to always protect us against too much inflammation. So when estrogen drops off, we suddenly get a lot more inflammation in our systems. And that means less energy, it means more pain, more brain fog. A lot of us find we're getting sick more often and it takes longer to bounce back. That whole feeling of aging faster than we should, inflammation is a big part of what's driving that. And again, the Western diet tends to be very inflammatory. The foods most of us are eating, processed foods, refined grains, sugar, cocktails, they're inflammatory. So the way we eat in these times is pouring fuel on that fire. Now let's talk about how much menopause affects our brain health and our brain functions, because most women don't know about this. I didn't. When we experience hot flashes and we find, they're uncomfortable, maybe embarrassing, we don't realize lots of times they're a sign that our brains are struggling. See, when estrogen drops off, parts of the brain that responded to estrogen stop getting fed. And these parts of our brain that are getting starved in menopause, they're the parts that control memory and mood and focus and temperature regulation. So hot flashes are a sign that our brain's thermostat isn't calibrating right anymore. It's a brain symptom. And menopause also causes real structural changes in the brain that make us more vulnerable to anxiety and depression, more trouble concentrating, and more memory issues. So menopause is a time of particular vulnerability for our brains. And that's probably why women represent 2/3 of all Alzheimer's cases. And here's something else I didn't know. Of all the organs in the body, the brain is the most vulnerable to a poor diet. And it's because, unlike every other organ, brain cells don't replace themselves. So the cells we have when we get into menopause are the most we're ever going to have for the rest of our lives. What we feed them matters more now than ever before. It can really feel like an overwhelming set of systems that experience this vulnerability at this stage of life. And I think part of what makes menopause so disorienting is that it's all happening at once. It's an entire interconnected set of systems that are all shifting at the same time. The blood sugar, fat storage, inflammation, brain function, and those are all part of our metabolic health. And in menopause, it can feel like suddenly we're aging way too fast with this cascade of metabolic changes. And because it's our hormones that are driving all these changes, it may make sense to discuss HRT with your doctor. But whether or not HRT is part of your plan, how we eat can still make this enormous difference. Because all these systems are metabolic, changing how we eat can support them all at once. Now I have to tell you, I was in that definition of crazy where you do the same thing over and over and you expect different results. For years, I kept trying what used to work for me. Okay, I'm just going to eat less, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to cut back. And it wasn't working. And it was frustrating. And I would comfort myself with food and wine, and then I would try again. But the way I ate, the way I handled weight gain, it all felt like something I knew how to do. I was good at it. I'd been able to manage my weight, even when other people struggled. But menopause changed all the rules of the game, and it wasn't working anymore, and I was arguing with reality. I kept defending what I had always done, and I stayed stuck in that position for 10 years. And then came this moment that shocked me out of it all. I started working in nursing homes as a psychologist, and I was shocked at how many of my patients were not much older than me. They were in their 60s and their 70s, and that was right around the corner for me. So I started researching their conditions to see if I could help them get home. Diabetes, dementia, heart disease and stroke, and cancer. Every condition I was researching traced back to diet as the primary driver. These are metabolic diseases. So changing our diet could change this, but it was too late already for my patients. they had all passed certain metabolic thresholds. Their bodies were not going to be able to recover anymore. And the wake-up call was this: Ginny, that's the path you're on. You feel like you're eating really pretty well enough, better than average, but it's not well enough to keep yourself truly well. The nursing home showed me where that path was actually leading, and I wasn't okay with it. I wanted to be well for the rest of my life, to live really actively and independently, and it was becoming really clear. If I wanted to stay truly well for many years to come, I was going to have to change how I was feeding my body in a more complete way, and no one else was going to be able to do it for me. So I went to the research and I looked for a small set of clear, empirically proven principles that consistently lead to better metabolic outcomes, including for women in menopause. I found clear, specific guidelines for how to eat that consistently addressed these exact metabolic issues. At first, what I kept seeing in the research looked obvious. People who were reversing the very issues I was concerned with, that I was seeing in my nursing home patients that were metabolic, they were eating more fruits and vegetables. Well, duh. Everybody knows that. But I'm a trained scientist, so I forced myself to look deeper. What was I missing? And the principles started coming into focus. It wasn't just eat more vegetables, eat some plants. The data pointed to something a lot more specific. Eating them in far larger quantities than most of us imagine, and eating them whole, not juiced or dried. It really was very different from what everyone I knew was doing. And it reframed everything for transforming metabolic health. Instead of trying to eat less and make the body smaller, the goal became thoroughly nourishing the body, giving it plenty of what it actually needs. And it sounds simple, but the gap between where most of us actually are and what our body actually needs is a lot larger than we tend to think. Even the smart, health-conscious women I work with, they're typically eating maybe 6 ounces of those foods a day, and the threshold that really moves the needle is closer to 2 pounds a day, every day. It's not a small gap. So it's not a matter of tweaking. Most of us are further from where we need to be than we realize, and in both directions at once. What I mean by that is we're eating more of the foods that actively hurt our metabolic systems, and we're eating far less of the foods that actually protect and rebuild them. So how do we get here? The food environment that we have lived in our whole lives, it's full of low nutrition options that crowd out the truly nutritious foods our bodies actually need. And that's how we end up eating too much of what hurts us and too little of what nourishes us. And then we gain weight, and we're told we're going to fix that by eating less. And that just actually makes the nourishment deficit worse. We don't fix this gap by eating less or tweaking our diet a little bit. We fix it by stepping onto a completely different path, a path that's filled with abundant, highly nourishing whole foods. When we start eating enough of the right foods, our body finally feels fed, and things change. We stop getting hungry between meals, snacking becomes unnecessary, the processed, craveable foods stop calling to us. It's the most natural way to rebuild metabolic health and vitality, giving our bodies what they need to thrive. Not making ourselves smaller, but giving our bodies what they actually need. And the weight takes care of itself. With full nourishment, the body can support our brain cells, it can support stable blood sugar, restorative sleep, muscle strength, and so much more. So it's not about mostly eating kind of healthy. It's about eating wisely for full nourishment in amounts that actually move the needle. And when we do this, the changes go way beyond weight. Our metabolic systems transform. The most common thing I hear from people when they start eating this way is pain went away. I don't have neuropathy anymore. That pain I had in my back went away. Just not feeling inflamed anymore. Getting out of bed in the morning without pain for the first time in years. It's wonderful. And then energy comes back. Often our sleep improves. We find we're thinking clearly again. And something quieter, but just as significant, we find that we just have a healthier, calmer relationship with food. We feel more unflappable. We get through the day with more ease. We get along better with the people in our lives. It just adds up to a completely different experience of life. And a lot of us feel a lot more confidence about the years ahead. So metabolic strength from fully nourishing our bodies, it's the best protection against the conditions that are making most people sick and dependent the last 10 years of their lives. When I stepped back from all the research, something important became clear. Across hundreds of very different nutrition studies looking at specific foods and diet patterns and these various metabolic outcomes like weight and blood pressure, blood sugar and heart health, the same high-level patterns kept showing up. I was seeing a small set of fundamental guidelines for how to eat that consistently helped all these systems improve together. I call this set of guidelines SimplyWise eating. And when you eat the SimplyWise way consistently, you step onto a whole different path. It's a path for changing the conditions inside your body, rebuilding some of the protection you lost when estrogen and progesterone dropped, and we do it all so simply, with real food. It's a completely different experience when you're going through life feeling energized and satisfied and clear. It becomes something you want to do, not something you have to force yourself to do. And that's exactly the transformation that I guide women through my book and my coaching programs. If you'd like to explore these, reach out to me directly. I'd love to speak with you. And if you're just curious to see what are those 4 guiding principles that you found, I've put together a free one-page overview. The link is below.